This is the Trading Psychology Podcast. This is VP, creator of No Nonsense Forex and author of the book No Nonsense Forex Trading Psychology. And with me, as he is every week, it is the supreme leader of the Flat Earth Trading Society. It is Robb Reinhold.
Well, thank you, Patrick. You're going to need to cut back on these adjectives because there's never going to be enough room on my tombstone for all of them. And I don't know if that's a compliment of the supreme leader of the Flat Earth Trading Society or if that is an insult, but we'll just leave that up in the air.
I think being the Kim Jong-un of anything is likely good.
What if I was the King Jong-il of the King Jong-uns?
That's a little too meta for my brain right now. I'm too focused on this episode, and it's going to be a good episode this week, traders, because if you've noticed what we do here, especially as time goes on and we're trying to find really good episode ideas, we will take a point we made in previous episodes, and this is a point we've made several times, Robb, and we will isolate it and make it its own episode. And they usually turn out really good because so many people have experienced exactly what we're going to talk about today. I would wager to say that almost everybody listening to this podcast has probably gone through this already, because if you began your trading career and then it just took nothing but losses right off the top, you would have probably quit. You'd have probably said, this is stupid, this is not what I thought it was, and moved on. But chances are that you had some measure of success, not only early on, but a bit later in your career too, when it was still too early to tell if you were actually a good trader or not. But that's not how you felt about it. You probably had this sense of euphoria. We could have called this episode Euphoria, honestly. But I guarantee you, it was probably the reason for future futility. It certainly was for me. It's the reason I blew out 3 accounts. And Robb, this is one of my episodes that I kind of crafted. But so before we get into my notes here, do you have anything to add before we start doing that?
Yes, and I think it's such an interesting concept is that when you are in your body, in your life, you have a very, very difficult time. And actually, I'm going to say it's completely impossible for you to have an objective view of what you're doing in life. But let me give you like an analogy of, let's say that you are a scientist and you're watching someone who is learning how to ski for the first time. And you've watched a lot of other people learn to ski. And, you're writing the notes like, oh yeah, okay, they're falling down at first, but then they get that 1 or 2 really good runs under their belt. And then they're like, I'm ready for that black diamond. Now the scientist is going to say, oh, this is going to get ugly. They already know what's going to happen, but you don't. You don't, because you don't have the ability to really step outside of yourself. And I remember when I very first started trading, about 2 years after I was started, I brought my brother in to trade with me. And on one of his first trades, I was, taught him about stops and all that things and controlling your risk. And he decided to pull his stop order out. And sure enough, the trade went down below where his stop was, but then it rebounded back up and he made money. And he was so proud. He's like, I made money on that. I'm good. And I said, oh, you just set yourself up for a lifetime of pain. And sure enough, I said, look, you now think that that's what you do because you got rewarded early on and you think, oh, they always come back. I promise you, there's going to be one that doesn't come back and it's going to get you. Sure enough, that's what happened. Even though I told him those words, he literally couldn't step back from himself to save himself because it's just very difficult to do that. So yes, I think this one, everyone has gone through this. And I think it's one of those things that I'm not sure that early on you even are self-aware enough to know what's going on.
And I would even argue that later on in your career, you might not be self-aware because I think, well, we'll get to this in a moment. Let me kind of take it back to where it all begins, in my opinion. And I've said this quite a few times on this channel. I just don't know how many people listen to everything we do compared to who just comes in every once in a while compared to who's new. I don't know. So I'm going to say it again. And when you first learn to trade, in particular, when you first learn how to read a chart, before you learn that, charts are so daunting. Like there's all this stuff there and people are reading it like they're, 4-year grads of this stuff. And then you sit down to learn it. And within a week, you can pretty much be caught up to where they are in terms of technical analysis and how to read a chart. At least that was the experience for me. Because I don't learn things very well, but I learned this so quickly. So for me, it was like, wow, all of this stuff got demystified right away. And the really cool part about it is I got excited along the way too, because almost every example I saw of a tool you can put on your chart worked when they showed it to me. And they were using historical examples. They weren't making up price action. It was real price action. They used a real tool, and it made a real profit almost every time. And so then I get into the real world, and I start using these things. And early on, they were working most of the time for me. And I'm like, this is extraordinary. This is like a level of wizardry that I didn't like. Do Wall Street people know about this? Like, am I going to surpass them in month one? And I actually did. I was just killing it early on. And so in my dumb brain, I'm like, wow, good thing I didn't go to school for 4 years. Good thing I didn't toil away on Wall Street, because I'm already ahead of these people 1 month out of learning technical analysis for the first time. So Robb, how absurd does this sound? And I know it's been a while since you started, but can you relate to this at all?
I can absolutely relate. And, I've told the story about stochastics. Like when I first started stochastics, oh my gosh, like when these two lines cross, I just buy. And when they cross again, I just sell. Like, oh my gosh, like I am so smart to be able to tell when two lines cross. And then, you find out it's not that clean. It's not that easy. And sometimes they fail. And then you really come to terms with how difficult technical analysis is. It's not difficult, but just the failings of it. Technical analysis is just statistics. Yeah, it might be right 60% of the time, but 40% of the time, it's terrible. Now, Patrick, I would love for you to put a video at Maverick Trading down in the description below in this video on YouTube, tying it to a class I did, or a video I did called Technical Indicator Myths, the Myths, Legends, and Fairy Tales of Indicators. It's about it's a 27-minute video, and I go through all the reasons why we feel like we do it first, and then the reality hits, and pretty much the process people go through.
Yeah, even though you're asking me to put an anti-indicator video on my channel, I will watch it first, and then I will do that.
It's not anti-indicator. It's understanding what the indicators are doing and saying, and really understanding it. Because when I was learning about stochastics, what I learned was when the lines cross, do this. If you ask me, what do these lines mean? I don't know. I have no idea. And so stochastics can be very accurate in very specific situations. But in other situations, they're very inaccurate. And if you really can understand when and what situation you're in, you could pull out the correct tool for the job. And that's what we talk about at Maverick is indicators are tools, and there's certain tools for certain market conditions that work better than the others. So it's definitely not anti-indicator, but it's definitely anti just do this when they cross and you'll be fine.
I don't go into the mechanics of the indicator that much to where I know why these two lines are crossing. And it has still worked pretty well for me. So it just goes to show, if you dive deeper into it, it could help. But don't let it lead to analysis paralysis either. Just so everybody knows. Yeah, I have not gone super nerdy into these things like some people do. I know we have a lot of indicator nerds on this channel, and I say that in the best possible way. But just know, to me, it's not essential. But Robb might have a really good point here. It's worth looking at. And we'll go ahead and put that at the top of the show notes after the description. So check that out when you can. So moving forward from there, I think that's a pretty obvious point. I don't think we need to hammer too much on that anymore. But something else I want to hit on too. I would imagine also when you first started, you tried to immerse yourself into the Forex trading community in some way. Maybe not as deep as being like a part of trading groups and chat forums and things like that, but at least you followed some people on Twitter or on YouTube, or just subscribe to people's blogs, whatever route you took. This all depends on when you started too. You were influenced by influencers. And I've said this in the past too. The problem with these people is they typically do not like to show you when they lose. They lose just as much as everybody else does, but it's not in their best interest to show you that. A lot of times it gets even more egregious, and they will just simply cherry pick a time frame and a tool that worked really well and then just simply show it to you. They're not lying, but they're not being very forthright either. And when you first start out, all you really want to do is believe. So you'll look past anything I just said, because you want that feeling, you want that excitement, you want that to fuel you to learn something that's going to take you time and effort to learn. I get it. But that doesn't mean it's a good thing. That doesn't mean it's going to help you down the road. What it does mean is it's probably going to harm you. It harmed me. And I was looking at very reputable places like DailyFX and places like that. I wasn't really following any hype beast type traders. But still, again, almost every example I saw of technical analysis worked. And everything I saw in the future was either something working or a cherry-picked example of something working in the past. So that's all I had in my head. And again, really super motivating, made me really, really excited, but absolute death for my bank account.
Patrick, I'm really glad that I got started before this all came around. I started trading in 1997, and there just wasn't, CNBC was like brand new. CNBC had been like a thing for like 3 or 4 years. And, they did have cults of personality on the TV. And I remember the first time sorry, I got to tell this story. It's just a great story. It was in 1999 it was in 1998. And I had just shorted this stock called Wave 4. WAVO is the ticker symbol. And I was down like 20%, and it was a pretty big position. And before the market opened the next day, the stock was gapping up another 3 or 4 points. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And some guy came on TV that I'd never seen before, a really high, whiny voice. And his name was Jim Cramer. And he was a hedge fund manager at the time. And they asked him specifically about the stock I was in. And he's like, that's a piece of garbage. That's the worst stock ever. I actually just was on the phone with my broker trying to get 25,000 shares to short, but everyone's already got them short. And from that second, that stock turned down and went lower and lower and lower and lower. And I ended up being profitable. And look, it was going to go lower anyway, but Jim Cramer did it. And so for the next little bit, I really loved Jim Cramer. Whenever they had him on, I listened to him because that was the guy that saved my trade. After a while, I realized, I think I'm listening to the wrong person. Look, nothing against Cramer, love Cramer, but just follow your own rules, your own system.
Yeah, and believe it or not, traders, there was a point in time where Jim Cramer was actually very influential and did move the market. But over time, he's got a little ahead of his skis, I would say. And, to be fair, too, he's forced to make predictions when he doesn't want to. But he does them with such confidence behind it that it really does get him in trouble when he's wrong, because people will cherry pick those too. I've done an entire blog on this. But confidence is the main thing here, traders. It all leads to overconfidence, which we've already talked about in a previous episode, is going to hurt you. So if you're really early in your trading career right now, just understand, you're not that good. Do not say, I made 30% this month and extrapolate that out throughout the entire year and extrapolate that out through 10 years. That is not ever, ever, ever going to be how it works. The best traders in the world could never even think of doing something like that. And it's certainly not going to happen to you. I'm sorry. But the thing is too, though, Rob, is it doesn't just happen early on. You can be maybe 1 or 2 years in and then have a really good year. And I've even told people, I'm like, look, your yearly performance is a much better barometer of how good of a trader you actually are. But I will say too, if you started your career in like 2013, 2012, like those years that you and I have talked about in the past, Rob, where the market was just so volatile and would trend for such a long time, then your actual worth as a trader was probably pretty inflated. And we've had a couple of pretty decent years volatility-wise for trend traders in 2022, 2023. Not every year is like that. So what words of caution would you have to somebody who's put a bit of time in and just absolutely smoked 2023 and has all the confidence in the world going forward?
Well, first, let me give them a high five. I love to see traders just killing it. But let me also give you a cautionary tale. We have used the term delusions of grandeur in several episodes. And my first 10 years were a series of 20, maybe 30 periods of delusions of grandeur where I started to plan my family's future out. I learned a new strategy and I'm like, oh my gosh, this works every time. Like I learned the straddle strategy and options trading. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is all I have to do. And at first it did really well. And I'm like, this is it. I did it. I found the holy grail. And then of course markets change and it doesn't work anymore. Look, the market is huge. The market is like, look, I'm just going to use the term Godzilla. And I've heard the new Godzilla movie is fantastic. I haven't seen it yet, but I've seen a couple of Godzilla movies. You are the size of a human. The market is Godzilla. If you are not humble, it will absolutely crush you. The times that I've had my biggest losses are the times when I was not humble. So if you want to be in this game long term, stay humble. That's my advice to everybody.
Yeah, I think you and I have talked about humility in the past, and I normally don't see a real logical place for it, but in this particular situation, you're exactly right. Because anytime I used to go on a streak, I used to quote this line from The Wire. It says, even if I miss, I can't miss. And that's how I felt. And honestly, kind of tracking back a little bit to what we were saying before, with indicators, I wouldn't use the indicators in their base form. I would go out and find new ones that most people weren't using. Or I'd take common indicators and I would tweak the settings a little bit to make them better than they were before. And so that made me think, oh, this is all you really have to do. And I'm Christopher Columbus. I'm the first one to actually do something like this. And so there's a chance I probably have cracked the code. And I was actually putting a few strong months together after I blew out my first account. And I started to believe this too. So at any point in time in your career, you can really think that you have put together the perfect combination of whatever to really slingshot yourself to the front for the rest of your career. I'm going to tell you now, this is also not going to be the case. Because markets are different year to year. On top of that, you can have a system that really plays well in the market that's going on right now, but 2025 could be completely different. But the biggest point I want to make, Rob, and you and I have touched on this too, is there really is no substitute for experience. And in year 2 and even year 3, in my opinion, you just don't have enough.
I will totally agree, but it's probably when your confidence is the highest. We've talked about the Dunning-Kruger effect. And look, there's part of the Dunning-Kruger effect, like before you've read like one trading book and you think, well, hell, I can do this. This is going to be easy. That's one part of the Dunning-Kruger. And then of course you find out how hard it is. But then after you've been trading and you've gotten past like the first stuff and you start to get some good track record and some good results, you start to get a little bit over your skis again. It just happens. It just happens because you've done it. You've put in the work. It wasn't, you're not getting lucky. At this point, you're into year 2 and 3, grinding it out. And you now say, hey, I'm not getting lucky here. This is from me. That's when it gets dangerous. The delusions of grandeur, hey, I figured this out. I don't need to be as cautious anymore. I don't need to be as controlled as I was because I got a little bit more money. I got a little bit more this. I can throw a little money on this trade. You start to get really reckless because of that overconfidence. I think that 2 to 3 years is a really dangerous point because in the world of trading, you're like a teenager. You're like a teenage boy. At 18, the height of their confidence, the height of their ability, the height of everything, but dumb as can be.
Yeah, and speaking of the Dunning-Kruger effect, a really good illustration for me is a movie I saw a long time ago. I think it was called With Honors. It was Joe Pesci, and he was a homeless guy who ended up getting into Harvard. And the one thing I really remember from that movie was towards the end, he had this really pompous professor. The guy's like a total stereotype. I think he had glasses and a bow tie and spoke in a very posh accent, even though he was American, and would just try to browbeat Joe Pesci and the rest of the class with all of his points. And towards the end, and remember, I was younger too, so like these things have a more profound impact on me back then than it probably would now. But he said, and I never heard anything like this, but I took it with me. He said, the reason why I'm so smart, and Joe Pesci said this, not the professor, and he said, the reason why I'm so smart is because I realize I don't know anything at all. And I took that with me forever. Now, in trading Forex, I forgot about it because I got so overconfident and I thought I cracked the code 100 different times. But to that point, I really, really agree. And that was always a very easy way for me to remember it too.
Well, that reminds me of one of my favorite quotes of all time from Albert Einstein. The true sign of intelligence is an open mind. That one just always gives me, like, you've got to be open. You got to be open to, hey, maybe there is more. Maybe there's a closed mind is never going to get you anywhere. Yeah, and once you start to get those delusions of grandeur, it's like you've closed the door. Like, hey, I've done it. I don't need to do anymore. I'm on the top of the hill. Oh, that's so dangerous.
Yep, I can speak to that many, many times over. Now, and as far as solutions go, though, Rob, there's two that I can think of. If you can think of any more, please add one on or two. But there are things we've already talked about in the past. The first one is just understand from when you get in. I hope there are some newer traders out there that hear this and take this with them forever. But this is going to be a very long game. This can last the rest of your life. As long as your mind is sharp and cognizant, you can do this literally as long as there's a market to trade. So, and you're probably going to need a lot of that time too to not actually get good, but to make this sustainable. So play the long game. Understand that it's not going to come quick at all. Honestly, if I would have been told this before I started, I might not have even started. But now that you're in it, now the bug has bitten you, just understand you're not going to want to hear it, but this is going to be a very long play. And so the other piece of advice I would give too is something we've done an entire episode dedicated towards, and that is to have other streams of income for as long as you possibly can. It might be a very long time before trading actually becomes sustainable. I know that wasn't the dream. I know when you have these runs, especially early on, you think that I'm full of it, and it's not going to be that way. But I promise you, that is just how this game is. You know, Rob, do you disagree with any of these? Do you have any you want to add yourself?
No, I don't disagree with them, and I'm going to go fairly nihilistic here because I was really thinking about, okay, what advice could I give? And then I really realized that, well, guess what? All of these stumbling blocks, all of these things are part of the process. And I guess the biggest advice I could give you is to be self-aware enough to understand that when you just stubbed your toe, what it meant and how you got there and how you can avoid it. Because we did a whole first episode. I think our first episode, I talked about brain chemistry. I talked about how you literally are a program. You're a machine running programs. And until you get out of that, you can't be self-aware. And so, yes, there's so many things that can trip you up. Overconfidence. The biggest thing that I could say to you is like, try as much as you can to be self-aware. And I know trading beat this into me to where when I got overconfident, and Patrick, I know you've done the same thing, now we're like, oh shit, we are paranoid. And I'm like, okay, no trading. Oh shit, I don't need to do that anymore. But I was finally self-aware enough to realize when I, to that point, I was the worst person as far as a trader goes. And I needed to just rein it in because in the past, I'd use those times to get myself in trouble. So my advice is be aware you are going to make these mistakes. And if you're aware of it, when you make the mistake, I want you to then be like, oh yeah, this is a mistake that Rob and Patrick said that I would make. And these are the ways they talked about getting over it. If you can do that, then life is like a stock chart. There's pullbacks and there's corrections, but it just keeps getting better because you are constantly getting to be a better human being. And the great thing, and I tell everyone this, learning how to be a good trader, and again, the psychological part of this, helped me make money, and that's been great. But I truly believe it's helped me be a better father, a better husband, a better son, better communicator, because I'm much more self-aware of what I do. And now, my wife and I used to get in fights when we were newly married, and now, and I'll be mad. I'll be like, how dare she? And then I sit and think about it, and I'm like, oh, you did this again. And sure enough, I was at least half of the problem. And then I could go in and talk about it. And we have a great talk about it. And then we've been married now for 27 years, and we've both gone through this process. There's nothing left to fight about anymore. It's going to be the same thing with trading. You're going to go through these fights, be self-aware, fix the situation. In the end, there's no fights to have, and it's really, really peaceful.
It's such a great point, too, because you're so right. I have no regrets for starting this whole journey into trading. There have been so many residual benefits along the way, and I didn't even really realize them until I started talking to you, Robb. And then I look back, I'm like, man, yeah, I can. This is why I don't act this way anymore, and this is why I think of this thing over here completely different. And the same came with waiting tables. I feel like I waited tables way too long. I feel like anybody who's been in that industry probably feels the same way. But the things that I took away from it that have helped me so much now in terms of just everyday communication with people to the way I broadcast on my channel. It's no regrets at all for not only starting something, but really taking it seriously and moving forward with it and paying attention along the way too, to the things I was doing wrong and trying to hone that craft into something that was just completely streamlined the way it is now.
Let me add one last thing, and it's going to be very in your face. And this will be something that you can do in your life that will always help. Whenever something goes wrong, or whenever you don't get the results you want, or whenever you lose, it was 100% your fault. Now look, I know that's not true. I know that there's lots of circumstances out there, but if you look at it, be like, okay, it's my fault. And I'm not talking about beat yourself up, it's your fault. It's, okay, I didn't do something. I didn't have something. I contributed to this somehow. If you go into every part of your life when you fail at something, when you don't get that job or you get fired by a job, if you always have the attitude that it was your fault, there was something you didn't do right, and next time you're going to do it right, you will do so well in life. If you have a victim mentality, it's going to be really tough for you to ever be self-aware enough to fix any of your problems.
I'll counter with this at the very end and say that 70% of my losses are, in fact, Jerome Powell's fault. But on that note, traders, thank you for joining us this episode, and we hope you join us on the next episode of the Trading Psychology Podcast. This is VP. Thank you for joining us.
Have a good day, everybody.